Hey everybody, I'm George Runkle with Runkle Consulting Incorporated, and today I'm going to give a presentation that I gave when I was going for my master's degree at Columbia University. And this was a research project I did for a course that I took there, and I hope to keep this down to 20 minutes. So let's go ahead and get going. All right, what we're going to cover. I'll cover basically what a shipping container is, who builds with them, the history of modular buildings. I'm going to go through that pretty quick. Recent projects. Recent is when I did this presentation, which was years ago, and how you build with containers, why, and what we think are future trends, which is pretty much a guess, but let's see how right we are. All right. And let's go. And containers start out. Obviously, this is before containers, break bulk shipping. This is after containers. You can see the advantage just looking right at you. Okay, history. You can go ahead and look in Wikipedia, but I had to do this for the course. All right, standards. This is kind of important. When you're putting shipping containers on rail cars or on a ship or on a truck, they got to be all pretty consistent from container to container. You can't have them differing significantly, and you also need to know how much you can load the container with when you're loading it, when you're shipping it. And so you need it to be a standard rate. When you stack them, you need them all to fit together nicely, so you have standards. All right, shipping containers are in these sizes. The most important size that we want to use for construction is 40 foot. I'll talk about that in a future video. A 53 foot you definitely don't want to use. Those are terrible. Okay, the standards. The big thing in the standards is going to be, the corner castings. But here's the three important standards. It's the dimensions and ratings. That's the size of the containers and how much they can take. And the dimensions are very, very exact, which they have to be. And that helps us in design too, because we know what we're getting as a design material. Okay, corner fittings, that's really important for when we're putting these together. The corner fittings have to be exact. If they weren't exact and they were different across brands, you'd have to use different type of connectors to connect different brands of shipping containers. Okay, and then of course this is the specifications and testings. Whenever manufacturers come up with a model, they have to test the containers, and these are very strict testing regimes as far as water resistance and loads. And the whole thing makes it, the design for us with shipping containers, much easier. Now going back here to this one right here, we can't use these loads. I was told I was arrogant by somebody on the internet because I didn't use these loads, but no, it's not arrogance. Once you start cutting up a shipping container, you change the strength of it. You can't go on the loads that come up and the specifications, even if that it does seem kind of arrogant. You have to run the analysis. All right, here's the terms. You may want to freeze this and study it. We want to use these terms for the different parts, so when we talk to each other, we know what we're talking about. In every business, in every occupation, there's jargons which we have to use so we all understand each other. We can't use different words. We can't say bottom joists instead of cross members. We might misinterpret what's being said. The front is not what you think of the front. The front is the front of the truck. That's not where the door is. You intuitively would think the door would be the front, but it's not. That's the rear. All right, the castings are especially important. I already covered that. All right, so let's go ahead with a short history of the modular buildings. Of course, there's advantages and disadvantages. Community occupations, opposition is a serious thing you're going to run into. Architectural limitations, you're dealing with the size of the modules. And unfortunately, I've dealt with some architects that don't seem to understand that, but there's a thing called gravity. If you cut up the modules too much, they don't work too well with gravity or from wind loads or earthquake loads. Code official resistance, you do get some, but I've had very little, thankfully, just two cities notably, but other places the code officials have been very supportive and very cooperative. Okay, who builds with them? And here's the different companies in different places. I'm not going to go through it because for brevity, but you can study these. I've worked with these three companies. I have not worked with Seabox. I worked with Al Masood Burgum as a client when I was over in Abu Dhabi. They built a number of buildings for us. They've got a pretty cool operation. All right, a lot of companies have tried to start building with shipping containers and failing. That's going to be the subject of a future video. it's very risky if you don't know what you're doing. And basically, these three things is what happens when you don't know what you're doing. You don't understand what you're doing, you don't know how much it costs, and you try to do too much. You're going to fail. All right, in history, I'm going to go through this very quickly. First modular building in the U.S. that I'm aware of is the Sears Craftsman House that you ordered by uh, by mail order. Came with everything you need, and you just put the sucker up. All right, and then of course you had the infamous Quonset huts and stuff that were used in World War I and World War II, and even into more recent times. And the Quonset hut type design is still used even more recently. In particular, K-Span has a building that looks almost exactly like that we were building in the military. All right, and then after World War II, you needed a lot of housing. So modular buildings was a way to try to mitigate that, and which brought us to the infamous mobile homes, built very, very cheaply, put up fast, provided housing, basically entry-level housing for people that were working and needed a place to live. And of course, they deteriorate very fast because they're built so cheaply, and they become horrible slums in time, and that's why people will resist you in your shipping container project. All right, history. The first permanent building seems to be Container City, and one in London. I'm sorry, but I don't know for sure if that's it. But as far as the builders of it know, they believe they're the first ones that have built a permanent facility in the world. Others may have been built before then, but they weren't permanent as buildings. We used them in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Afghanistan. I built with them in Uzbekistan. The first permanent building in the U.S. that we know of is SG Blocks in Charleston, South Carolina. And there was the Keetwonen project that was built in the Netherlands of 1,000 containers. And going through, this is the Container City one in London. Here is where I was working out of in Karshi-Khanabad in Afghanistan. We called it K2. A miserable place as far as weather, but building was nice. And the Keetwonen project. This is in the home that SG Blocks built. All right, got some examples here. I keep saying all right. I'm sorry about that. I got to stop doing that. Container City 1. It looks pretty nice. And again, as I said, it's probably the first major permanent construction project. And Tempo Housing, they built these things. They fabricated them in China, hauled them in by ship, and put them in place. Went up in a couple of days, and they brought them in. Everything was modular inside. They just had to connect the plumbing and electric, and there they were going with student housing for about 1,000 students. I believe it's since been taken down, but a real nice project. Here's one a friend of mine designed and built in Angola for workforce housing for the oil industry. Here on the right, it's under construction, and here's the final version. Very nice housing. And this is one I did in D.C. This is the Seacon apartment building outside of Catholic University, 3 stories, and it's multi-student housing. This is an apartment. This is an apartment. This is an apartment. This is an apartment. This is one, and this is one, and this is one. This is one. This is one. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, plus there's apartments in the basement, so it's 9, 12, 24 apartments for students, shared kitchen areas and living areas. Very nice, built on conventional foundations. Boy, I'm tripping over my words, aren't I? Terrible, terrible. Okay, I'm not going to be able to quit my day job and become a DJ. What was cool about this project is we started design in March and we were done in September. That's unbelievable for a project like this in a major city like Washington, D.C. Now, we had Christchurch, New Zealand. This one was built to replace a shopping center that was knocked down in an earthquake. It was meant to be a temporary facility, but people liked it so much they had to leave it up, and they had to reinforce it and make changes to make it a permanent building according to New Zealand codes. And here's one that I designed up in Saskatchewan, Canada, at a remote site. built the buildings in their facility in Saskatoon and hauled them up to the wilds of Canada. I don't know how this one got up. Most of them went up in the winter on ice roads. All right, and how they're built. Have to cut out the sides, have to reinforce when you cut out the sides. Windows are cut out. You put tubing up or angles as a place to anchor your windows. I got one where we're not doing either. We're going to use the walls, use cold form steel walls, and that'll be used as a way to make the frame. This is not needed structurally. It's just for making it easier to do the finish work. Putting them in place. Here we are at Seacon container, having to lift this container over existing houses. The builder / developer owned the houses that this had to go over, so he was able to get them emptied out. This is kind of problematic in a city area because I don't know the legalities of lifting something like a container over occupied dwellings. I wouldn't want to do it. And then positioning them in place in the first level is a pain. So the guy's prying here with steel bar. That has to be done to get them in position. See how I've got these real thick plates that are oversized? Did that on purpose so you could slide these around a bit to get them in place so you wouldn't be threading a needle. Okay, next level, what we did is we used the standard tandem lock cone locks between the levels. That way you could put a cone lock in place here, drop the container on top, and it aligns it right up. Best way to do it. Otherwise, trying to get these containers to stack exactly is again like threading a needle. Very difficult, and if you have a minor error in one level, it starts to accumulate as you go up higher, and it also accumulates in the horizontal direction. Using these cone locks, you don't have that problem. And here's the way we do it. This is a tandem lock vertical connector. They're not very expensive. They're pretty cheap. The horizontal connector, I understand, is pretty expensive. It's not so important to use this one. I've specified it because it's easy to put on and easy to work with, but you can just as well weld these sides together once everything's put in place. There's a number of ways to do that, but top to bottom, you definitely want to use the cone type connectors. All right, and the interior was built out in this building. We had to do it on site, but if you do these as modular buildings and get involved in the state's program for modular buildings, you don't have to do that. You can do everything off-site, have a third-party inspector inspect it instead of the city inspector, haul it to the site and stack it up. Why build with containers? Speed. Job that we did in DC went up fast. Working on the northern areas of Canada, we were able to get buildings up fast in a very short building season. If we tried to build with doing conventional construction in northern Canada, it would take forever because just getting the building permits up there would be a nightmare. Getting the building parts, the materials, would be a nightmare. Seacon building cost was much lower than conventional construction in Washington, D.C. I've been in touch with various people around, and the $150 a square foot was pretty timely at the time that we put this up. We're now up to about 200 a square foot, but we're still within the cost of normal conventional construction, and in certain areas it's much cheaper depending on the labor costs that you have in that area. Why build? I already said that. Fewer people on site, easier construction on remote sites. Strength. This building right here went up and we got hit with a tornado. About a year after it went up, the Cabbagetown tornado came through, and all the buildings that were on the street at least had some damage. This container house gave the tornado the finger. It had no damage at all. The disadvantages, as long as you have these people putting this crap up and then actually proudly showing it on the web, it's going to hurt you. Again, people don't want their neighborhood brought down by crappy buildings going up. And in some places, depending on where you are, how hard it is to get the container in place, how hard it is to buy the containers, the cost can be more. Again, though, the biggest thing you're going to deal with is community resistance. Future trends. Kelly, up in DC. She thinks it's the go-to way of construction in the future. We are going to see these used for industrial buildings, not temporary, but industrial buildings have done a lot of work using these for holding switchgear, transformers, and other electrical equipment. It works out very well. They're very strong, pretty good in areas where you need emergency power. They're also good for data centers because their inherent strength and scalability, for people in that business love that word scalability, but they are scalable. You can just have a standard type facility, and as your data centers expands, you can just add them on, and they are very, very secure. And we've done them for a couple of companies which we're not allowed to mention under pain of horrible non-disclosure agreements. Not horrible, but let's say very strict non-disclosure agreements. In other words, they'd sue me for everything I knew and owned. And probably take my children too if I talk too much about the facilities. Obviously, there's very high security involved in data centers. Okay, what do I think? Next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be slow growing because of limited knowledge of the facilities. I did this about 8 years ago, and my business is exploding now with shipping container buildings. So I guess I was right in the near term. It would take time to take off, but it's starting to. I see them being used in certain areas because they can be assembled quickly. I'm seeing them for workforce housing is a good use for them. Entry-level housing is another use, couples just getting married. There are very good uses for them also in areas where you've got very extreme climatic events, which I would like to see more usage there because these things are damn near impossible to destroy. All right, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and give me a call. And I want to just do a few thanks on this one. To David Cross, SG Blocks, Quentin DeGugier, thank you for talking to me late at night. Quentin and Noah, thanks for working with me and your friendship. Eric Burrs in New Zealand, I appreciate you taking my call and talking to me as long as you did. And of course, Evan Willoughby, who I work with quite a bit, doing buildings up there in Canada. Hey, great place, eh? And if you get a chance to go to Saskatoon, it's worth it just to go to the restaurants. It's got more restaurants per square mile than any place I've been to, or I guess as they say in Canada, every square kilometer. They're more of a modern country than us in the U.S. They use the metric system for the most part. And David, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate your sense of humor, and also thanks for the business you guys have brought my way. I do appreciate it. Thank you, and thanks for watching my presentation, and I hope to put up more videos in the future. Take care. Have a great day.